the inner critic transforms into an inner coach.
Yeah.
The escapers transform into inner nurturers. So the escapers are turning away from our shame and from our pain or from our own feelings. And so the correction or transformation there is now we have parts that actually will turn towards ourselves when it's hard, when it doesn't feel good inside. And the key thing, though, is that shame doesn't transform necessarily into a new part. It's about making this distinction between what's my actual raw experience and then what's the story that I'm overlaying. It's a shame story that I'm putting on my experience or that has been put on my experience my whole life.
Yeah.
And when we can tease that, so just that right there, what's my raw experience versus the story I'm telling about what's happening or telling about myself or telling about the world. And then building that capacity to hold our own experience. So in my case, it's not that I never feel shame anymore, but when I do, I don't go into these inner critic and escape cycles that take me down into a spiral that's like, I can be down for a while.
Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Ken, we are back to talk with two people who we have had some very lovely and successful conversations with in the past. I say successful because when I leave, I'm smiling. That to me is a successful conversation. um, I'm I'm excited, but they're bringing us something new, something in a new direction. We have a new book that's coming out from Jessica, Fern, and David Cooley, and I'm really excited to talk to them about it because it's a new angle. It's a little bit different than what I think people are used to hearing, especially after Jessica's name. I think there's a sort of presumption of everything being very, very targeted to non-monogamy.
But this is great work. We need this out in the world, and I think our listeners are going to be like, oh yes, yes, please, let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's entirely relevant, and for our listeners who are not here for the non-monogamy specifically, in fact, we have a whole ton of listeners who write in and they're like, why do you say it's about non-monogamy? It's clearly just about relationships. I'm like, yes, I get it. Because good non-monogamous skills are just good relationship skills. And the book that they've written is called Transforming the Shame Triangle, From Shame to Love with Parts Work. We've all got too much shame to dig out from under. So I'm very excited.
This is such good work.
Yeah, so let me just introduce our two guests. Jessica Fern, y'all know her already. I know that you have already become familiar with Jessica's work in the book Polysecure, of course, trailblazing into the world, bringing attachment theory and making it digestible and easy for us to understand, especially in the framework of non-monogamy. And then, of course, the follow-up texts, the Polysecure workbook, and then David joining that party with Poly Wise, which is honestly my personal favorite. That's my top pick. I love it. I love the angle that was taken there. The two of you come in with different backgrounds, but so beautifully woven together. Jessica is a psychotherapist, certified clinical trauma professional, the author of many books, and also just in there doing the work. I know, like just helping people dig out from under the stuff that is clogging up their relational lives. David is a professional restorative justice facilitator. Another great piece to bring in. And I really, really love that the two of you also just have such clarity of the fact that you're building a relationship that is growing and changing over time. So also just thank you for being out there modeling for us what it is to have relationship beyond just the standard narrative. Loving that. So your new book is titled The Shame Triangle, Transforming the Shame Triangle from Shame to Love with Parts Work. And y'all know I love parts work because who doesn't love that? Let's just start off with, and either one of you could just kick us off with what the heck? Why shame? How did you land there of all the next things to take on?
Yeah, I can start. It felt like it was something that also came to me. in working with people, whatever their relationship structure was, as we're working through kind of where they are versus where they want to be, right? With their personal growth, whether it's career, health, healing, relationships, that's kind of why we usually seek out coaching or therapy, right? We're in one place and we want to be in a different place.
Mhm.
And so seeing what the obstacles were. And
Yeah.
again, it would be this inner voice is usually how people would start to describe it, or this feeling of unworthiness, or the feelings of shame, or maybe they didn't even know there was shame, but it would be this, oh, I can or I shouldn't, or feelings of guilt. And then as I use parts work to unpack it, I found, oh, this isn't just one voice or two, it's actually multiple. It's a inner triangle of
Yeah.
these archetypal parts of the inner critic, our shame, and then the several ways that we escape through
Yeah.
either something like perfectionism or zoning out, numbing out, or even getting aggressive.
Okay.
So
So
this is coming out of like working with multiple people and just seeing the patterns over and over that
Seeing the patterns over and
s-
over again. Exactly. Exactly.
and I'm sure the two of you have already dealt with all of your shame. It's just gone, right? I'm jesting, but one of the things my work is like it starts with foundationally in jealousy, and one of the things people sometimes assume is that there's a solution for something like jealousy, or that there's a solution for something like shame. And I love the idea of transforming, specifically using parts work, because at that point we're talking about sort of a move you can apply when the shame comes back, when you find yourself
yeah.
in a new relationship to it, because it's not just a one and done, right? I really appreciate that. It feels very easily brought in and like woven into the fabric of life.
Yep. I could resolve transform all of my existing shame and then tomorrow find more.
That's right.
So yeah, it needs to be this process of okay, here it comes again. What do I do?
Yeah, I think that's a really key feature of this work. For me, I likened it to chronic illness, which is something that I've struggled with for a really long time. And as far as I know, I'm always holding out hope that one day I won't have to deal with it, but it's still there for me and it's decades long. So, how do I manage it in a way that really keeps me feeling integrated, that keeps me feeling whole, keeps me feeling like, okay, it's coming back, I have to deal with it, but it's not dominating my experience. So, it's really about how do we keep working with things that are challenging, that resurge over and over again.
Yeah, I hear you coming into relationship with shame and with a chronic illness, with jealousy, with these things that are sticky. They're sticky and they're built into the very fiber of what it is to be human. And it's ironic because now as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, you're also destigmatizing, so therefore de-shaming shame.
That's right.
Like,
Right.
Mhm.
Totally, totally. And I think there could be a way, especially in our culture, where we think resolution is about solution. There's sort of a dubious connotation to the word solution, as
yeah,
if it's done, it's gone, we've solved the problem. And so I think that can set people up for a kind of frustration or a sense of failure if they continue to struggle, if it comes
Mhm.
back again. So we're really wanting to normalize that this is an iterative process.
yeah. And David, I'm thinking immediately of, so in your work in restorative justice, I mean, shame is a core element there. It seems obvious, but also incredibly hard for people to talk about. If we're going to move out of punitive conversations around justice and into restoration, we gotta do something. There has to be some sort of action to take with the shame. Otherwise, we're stuck, right? I mean, that's what my
Absolutely.
gut says.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one of the biggest obstacles to accountability, right, in terms of repair in relational ruptures, what we're looking for is acknowledgement, validation, and some kind of path forward that really holds space for the hurt that emerges in conflict, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's my hurt or your hurt, right? And so if we can't talk about what's hard, what's hurtful in a relationship and acknowledge it as such, then we're really stuck in our process. And I found one of the biggest obstacles to being able to hold someone else's hurt or receive feedback about the way we've hurt them, right, is shame.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely see that in especially working with people who are they're really trying to change old patterns, like the patterns that had gone under the radar while they were monogamous, but all of a sudden now are super obvious, like the shame, they just like not wanting to talk about it. And so I'll hear people say like, well, let's only talk about the future. We'll only talk about going forward and not get into that layer of repair, which leaves so much actual relating on the table. So I'm curious if you can walk us through a sort of a brief connection building, I think, about like how do we move out of shame? What is this shame triangle at root? Can you help us understand it?
You want to go, Dave, or me?
Go for it. I was just talking, so let's keep it balanced.
Mix it up.
Yeah.
Great. So we said it a little, but for listeners, so the shame triangle, I'm seeing it as an internalized drama triangle.
Yeah.
I'm assuming a lot of people know about that.
We did a whole episode on it recently. So
Perfect, right.
yeah.
The persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer. And that is it's a very ingrained dynamic in our culture, in our relationships. And so realizing that has become internalized, where it is the perpetrator becomes the inner critic, which is the voice within us that beats us up, that says, what's wrong with you? You should have, you shouldn't, why did you? Uh-oh, right? And it's usually in the second person. That's how I identify it. It has
Yeah.
you language,
You.
Mhm.
right? And then, but you could ask, who is this voice talking to? It
Yeah.
has an audience.
It's pointing the finger somewhere.
Pointing the finger somewhere, and it has a very loyal audience in shame, which is the part, or even parts of us that hear the inner critic and go, oh, you're right. I am broken. I am not enough. I am too much. I am, right? And it's this deflated, fully blended experience of feeling shame of the truth, quote unquote, of the inner critic.
Yeah.
And that's a really intense dynamic. Like, that's enough, right?
That's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'm thinking, Ken, of your experience of trying to work through some shame around. There's been like big shame, like, oh, I have this sexual shame to work with,
Right.
or
It's like it runs
yeah,
through so many different things, very
yeah.
core.
And I think we all have that, but Ken and I have talked about that, right? Like in big episodes, and you unpack it, it looks like this great big thing. But then there's also the day-to-day stuff. I hear you bringing attention to how these internalized voices, these parts, have assumed roles where I can then like build and how- reinvigorate the shame cycle
Yeah.
with any little thing that comes up during the day. I could literally
Yeah.
spill milk and
Everything is evidence. Everything is proof for shame and the inner critic to keep those narratives going.
yeah.
Exactly.
So they
Yeah.
get locked in a cycle. And archetypally, the triangle is the most active number, right? It's the number that keeps things in motion versus if
Right.
we had a square dynamic, we'd have some stability.
Yeah.
No. So it makes sense that they're like, it's just like flying around and you're hearing these voices or having that felt sense. And there's a phrase, I think it's straight from the book that I read, relational shame injuries. I like reading about that, the idea of like these being injuries that we're sort of creating and recreating, not just between two people, but also within ourselves. So there's
Right. The
not
things
just a
that
finger pointing, but
inspire. Yeah.
throwing rocks at each other.
The things
Right.
that inspire shame
Yeah,
to then have this conversation.
absolutely. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of why this work is so important is because I think in many ways human consciousness is a very kaleidoscopic right process, and it's very difficult for us to see beyond our own experience, and so we're often projecting inner experiences to such a profound degree, but it's very difficult to track that as such. And so this work is really an invitation to start seeing the ways in which so much of what we think of as relational conflict is really, instead of intrapersonal, starting intrapersonally, starting within self. And so this is a way to start tracking that, and the third component of the shame triangle is the escapers.
Mm.
Right. And so these are the behaviors or the strategies that we done to try to free ourselves or escape from the pain, the really intense emotional pain that comes from the interplay between the inner critic and our shame part. Right. And so these escapers are multifaceted. Everyone seems to have kind of inclinations or predilections towards maybe one set of strategies versus the other, but it's quite a gamut. And it helps us really understand in a very practical way, okay, how does the shame triangle then embody itself through our behavior?
Mm. So the escaper, forming that third part of the triangle, also can keep the cycle then sort of locked in place because
Yeah,
there's some place for the energy to go, just enough to vent off, but
temporarily.
temporarily,
Exactly.
yeah,
Right.
but not. Oh,
Perfectionism or zoning out or getting, too far into a substance, like it temporarily gives us a break. It
yeah.
presses the mute button, I like to say, on the inner critic and shame until it goes too far. And then the inner critic just gets reactivated. Look at how many episodes you just watched, or look at how drunk you got, or look at how spent too much on whatever. Yeah. So, and then it loops back in.
Oh, it's so intense. I feel like I'd like to also just like step back for a second and think about our shame. Our shame doesn't come from nowhere, right? It's also rooted in early patterns. So I'm thinking about both the early patterns that we get in our childhood, and that just form like residual matter. There it is. So whenever I'm thinking about parts working, thinking about where's my initial story, that where's the story coming from, and often it's from even a pre-verbal part. So those voices we're talking about, some of my clients will talk about, I don't have a voice. I'm like, yeah, okay, that don't worry about a literal voice. You're feeling something. But then I'm also just thinking about the way that we were handed those stories from people before us who also experienced their own shame triangles. And so this sounds like a way of actively moving into like an active move away from intergenerational trauma. If we could like build this into our parenting, if we could build this into our day-to-day, and here I sit with all adult children now. I'm like, whoa, I can feel how this model would have changed my parenting. And I knew the drama triangle model, but it was harder to apply. I like that you've drawn this clear connection between the way the drama triangle offers us a picture, and we teach the empowerment dynamic to get off the drama triangle. You offered a very clear path. So if you've got these three parts, you've got the shame part and the escaper part and the inner critic part, and they're in cycle. What's the pathway out? Because we've got like everyone of every age then is struggling with this. What do we do?
Well, I think there's two things that you're talking about there. I'll cover one and then pass the other off to you, Jess. Yeah, I think the first thing that you're mentioning is what are the origins of shame, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for me, that's a really powerful thing because I think one of the insidious things of shame is the way that it is internalized as if it's
Mm.
reflective of something fundamental about our who we are as an identity or identities, right? Just how our way of being is a problem, right? We internalize it as a very personal thing, and yet the things that or the narratives that actually sort of trigger those shameful feelings are all inherited. And so we're really wanting in part of this book to help people map out, where are these shame stories coming from? And these are all things that we've inherited from our families of origin, our cultures and societies of origin, right? So, what are some of these things? So, we kind of map out a spectrum of some of the predominant stories that we see influencing people's shame triangles, right?
Mm.
Purity culture, like when you talk about sex positivity, right? In the leap that is in consciousness to get to that, what are the narratives that you're having to overcome to really be able to embrace your own personal erotic experience, right? I'm thinking of religious narratives about what sex means, right? And what it means to be a good person in that context. What is productivity culture? What does success mean, right? These aren't things that we invent as individuals, right? So it's important to recognize these things. What is the narratives? What are the narratives about what you're supposed to look like as a body, right? There's just so many layers, there's so many stories. We're inundated with these stories, and if we don't make those links consciously, it's easy to think that this is something that we've created ourselves.
So anywhere that I hear a should in
Yeah.
myself,
Mhm.
I've got an opportunity to create shame.
Absolutely,
It's a lot of
absolutely.
places, David.
It is, and that's why I think it's important to have this perspective so that we're constantly vacillating between the micro and the macro, right?
Mm,
Like,
yeah,
where does an internalized voice, right, of self in the first or second person find its connections to a much larger source, a much larger influence, right? It's like, how do you feel about yourself after being on Instagram or Facebook for 15 minutes, right? It's like there's a feedback loop that's happening that we're not always conscious of.
an envy generating machine,
Yeah.
social media is.
And I appreciate you bringing in the concept of narrative, all these narratives that are provided to us and that we then start to generate on our own. Um, is that connected? Like, how do you use the narrative to help with the transformation?
Well, that's a good segue, I think, for you, Jessica, into, like, how do we start changing into the love triangle?
Mm,
Yes. I think because we do two things in the book. We do a lot of narrative therapy, and then we do more like parts work, IFS type of work. So the narrative piece, a lot of it is just being aware of these what feel like personal narratives and placing them in larger culture and society or in our family of origin. That in itself, externalizing these narratives, is
yeah,
a healing process. So that's something that we walk people through, of realizing this isn't your personal flaw or problem or cause. It's actually coming from somewhere else.
yeah. We did a show recently on purity culture, and the guest was talking about that. Like, it's the recognition of, oh, none of this was my idea. And just that, that's the seed that begins the deconstruction
Exactly.
process.
The
Yeah.
deconstruction process. Exactly.
Mm,
And then the other part is actually working with and dialoguing directly with these parts.
yeah.
And one of the first ways we start is with the inner critic and working with it, because an inner critic is actually a protector. Its methods aren't great, they're harmful to us, but it always has arisen from a previous time where we needed that part of us to come online and protect us and do the things that it does. So when we can get to that positive intention of our inner critic, a lot just transforms right there.
Mm,
And the inner critic can become an inner coach, or you can call it your inner guide or your inner cheerleader. We let people, you can name it, right? But for simplicity, we say the inner critic becomes an inner coach. It still holds us to standards, but it does so in a way that's encouraging instead of debilitating.
yeah. That's an
Yeah.
enormous leap to make. Like, in
It is.
practicality, I'm thinking about the way it feels to interact with that inner critic voice, and then to do the work, to dialogue enough to make space for it to have a positive tone, especially if we have a memory in that narrative of someone. And so if that inner critic also happens to sound like, say, one of our parents,
Yeah.
doubly so. I'm thinking about how we may have reinforcement happening in the outside world of that voice, and how it like landed in us. So the effort, I guess I just want to speak to the the effort that it takes, and that it's okay if this is hard. I don't think it's a switch we just flip
Yeah,
and
it's not.
say, yeah, there.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I've seen massive transformations in one dialogue with the part, but I've never seen it just fully resolve with one
Yeah.
dialogue with the part. It's usually a process. And we give a lot of tools throughout to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you're touching on too is sort of, there's what has become our own inner psychology, where I could say, yeah, that's my own inner critic. And then sometimes we'll have voices that it's like, that's not actually mine at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell a story in the book about that, where I had like two inner critics that felt like mine. And then I had my grandmother's critical voice. And
Yeah.
that required actually a different process.
Yep.
Yeah.
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 And part of what facilitates the differentiation that you're talking about, right? Because you're talking about, how do you create enough space between your own consciousness and the voice or the narratives of a part like the inner critic. And what we have to do is really lean into the other facet of IFS work, which is cultivating a consistent and integrated sense of self, right? And so self has a very specific meaning in the IFS context. And this is something that for a lot of people can feel elusive or abstract. And so a big part of the work and a big part of the book is really helping people narrow in on what's the difference. How do
Mhm.
I know if a part is active versus self energy, what we call self energy, which then leads to a capacity that we call self leadership, right? Which is the really grounded part of ourselves that can hold our entire inner experience. It can hold a space for all of these parts, but has no sort of blended elements with those, right? It's
Yeah.
it's the capacity to be agendaless, witnessing, and compassionate. And so cultivating that relationship is really key for a lot of people to be able to do this work well.
I'm thinking about the way I've seen some people, okay, maybe one person sitting in this room, um, do a great job of cultivating that sacred witness, the ability to hold steady and be in like such deep compassion for others while still deeply struggling
Yeah.
to hold
Uh,
that space. It's my problem too, but Ken, I think
no,
he's
that's
an
a good.
excellent example of
Yeah.
what it is to do it so well for others. But I am privileged enough to see and hear his inner voice, and I'm like, wow, it's still really gnarly in there. And I think it's been a great lesson for me as a partner to Ken to be like, oh, that's also a mirror. I bet I have that too, but I can't. It's harder to see. It's harder to see how my shame is manifesting, how my shame is my inner critic. It's much easier for me to see it out there. So I'm liking this model, and I'm thinking about how applying it
Yeah.
through a relational lens
Yeah.
too, and getting a little bit of space from it, because I'm imagining trying to like work through the book. I loved reading the book, and I was thinking about you gave a lot of practical, like try this, do this. It's an incredibly practical text. Um, and some of it might feel too close. Oh, I'm not even ready to get there, but I've caught myself while I was reading it thinking about my partners and thinking
Yeah.
about how, oh, I can see it out there. It feels like at least a starting point for grasping it, but then also a way to support each other and
Yeah.
and have this language.
And the concepts are great for, okay, so now it gives me another lens to use to look at our interactions. But then if I get into a situation where I'm watching you and I see you maybe starting to get onto the shame triangle, and I mean, I've tried to take action in those moments, and very often what I end up doing is actually just giving you another voice for the shame part of
Yeah,
the shame triangle. Because we
accidentally.
like
Yeah.
trying to suggest other ways to do things, and if you're already on it, that can read as, I'm not even doing the right things now, and all this. And so, do you have suggestions on how partners can help each other transform?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm really excited about in this book is the self-centered model, right? Which I think is one of the novel things that we bring to the IFS work. And it's a way of nuancing how to develop our own sense of ourselves, especially in self energy, but in relationship to the various parts. And so, one of the things that we're talking about in that is being able to track across three different centers within us, right? The heart center, the body center, and the mind center. Not that those are real separate centers in our being, but that these are ways in which are sort of different spectrums along a larger spectrum in which
Mm.
things show up. And so, one of the things that I see a lot of partners struggling with is how to move beyond one center. Often people are very good at one or maybe two centers, but another center will be neglected. And so, a lot of times I'll see people in a very intellectual process and sort of swirling and looping in thoughts, right? And trying to talk each other out of things that actually need to be addressed at the body, right? There's a really somatic component to a lot of people's conflict. And so being able to use somatic tools and shift your approach when things feel stuck on one level is really useful. Like for a lot of partners, what I find is if you can sort of jettison the intellectual attempt to try to work through something and just create a sense of co-regulation through the body center, you can actually shift the energy in a way that might have been surprising.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one example of how to think about the tools here.
And I think
Yeah.
what you're getting at too is the application of this,
Mm,
because
yeah.
it's written for the individual, but we know there's either going to be a workshop or a text that's coming that is the shame triangle for couples, for partnership, right?
Yeah.
Or for family, for intimate relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That makes me really excited because I mean, I think applying the drama triangle has been like definitely a game changer over the last like decade while I've
Yeah.
been working with that. And this specificity gives me a lot of hope for working with something that it's just really always been a sticky spot for me to work with shame, especially in my closest relationships. And I think the block is quite obvious. I see the beautiful person in front of me. So it's hard for me to actually relate to what they're feeling so deeply ashamed about. I'm like, I just can't see it. I can't feel from the inside. And I can be empathetic, but I'm not on the inside there. And so I'm excited about that. I'm glad you're taking that to the
Yeah.
next place.
And the way to think of it too is often we're interacting with each other's escapers.
Hmm.
My escaper is over functioning and over
Yeah.
caretaking. That's what my partner experiences. Or it's withdrawing and not being available, or it's defensive, or it's attacking. These are all escaper parts. And that's often it's like one escaper is locking into our partner's other escaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just touch on there in the drama triangle. There's this idea of we have a pretty typical on ramp, and I know you talked about like the like where do you gravitate towards? There's a bit of like we each just seem to get stuck in one of these parts more often.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that is related, and maybe not. Is it related to attachment style or like the strategies, the attachment strategies that we use? How we might get stuck more in escape or I mean, it feels kind of obvious. Like if you have the avoidant tendency, would you also maybe go look for, oh, I probably also fall into that escaper tendency a little more frequently? Or is this completely separate and feels like it operates dynamically in
I think
everyone?
there is, well, I think I've yet to meet someone who this isn't working in, but yes, how it plays out is different. So if I have more of an anxious attachment style, then my escapers are going to be more people pleasing,
Mm,
more caretaking, more over functioning in relationship.
yep.
If I have a more avoidant attachment style, I'm going to have maybe high status going on, like work is one of my escapes. And then I might also have this under functioning in relationship where I'm avoiding conflict and zoning out and doing certain things. Right. So, yeah, our attachment styles can sort of influence which escapers are more in the driver's seat for sure.
Mhm. I appreciate that because I know a lot of people have found new levels of safety thinking about how their attachment strategies are playing out, and this feels like we can add a new layer of dimension. Like there's another like, oh, and what's at work here? Maybe the tendency is lighting this up, but I think it's important then to come back to what you just said. You've never seen anyone where this dynamic isn't working, isn't playing out. It's just so it is just part of the human experience, at least as we know it today. Here it is. And so as a people working in now you're working in the shame area, how are you relating to your own shame? Like what if you're okay talking about that? Like what is this doing for you personally?
Yeah, I think it's really speeding up the degree to which I can localize, triggers in myself in the context of relationship, right? And so
Mm,
for me, the feedback loop of interpersonal relationships creates that sounding board through which I can really understand my own patterning. That's why I like relationship work. That's why relationships are the center of my universe, is because I see how much they facilitate personal growth, transformation, self-awareness, the things that I'm most interested in. And so what I'm able to do is localize through this language kind of the things that are getting activated in me closer and closer to real time. Right. And so it's much easier to work with a partner and say, oh, I can feel my inner critic coming up. When you give me feedback about X, Y, and Z, the way I did or didn't show up yesterday in our conversation, I can really feel how that's triggering this story from my inner critic. And I can feel how my shame is really taking that on. And my strategy for escaping is really to start shutting down and go dorsal with you. And
Mm.
it's getting harder to access my sense of emotion and agency with you. So it creates a network of language or nomenclature, right, that allows me to describe with more precision to the people with whom I'm attachment based, right?
Mm.
And it's allowing them to see my own process. The more I can describe and understand what's happening for me, the more regulated I feel, the more they feel safe in the interaction because they know I'm tracking these things. So it's really about deepening people's capacity to talk about what are very complex inner realities, right, in a way that just makes it more accessible. Right, we're all using this same language, and so it just facilitates a more effective conversation, in my experience.
Yeah. I'm
I,
all for language as a tool.
yeah, I appreciate that. And the so with yeah, there you are. You're in relation with someone. You've got a shared language. You can talk to each other about this. Um, are there in that moment? Are there scripts or tools or things that that we can use to bring awareness to the fact that this is happening without shaming the shame?
Absolutely. I mean, I just anything that you can say that's vulnerable and honest about your own experience, like anything that can bring you to naming your feelings and needs in the moment. I'm realizing that I'm feeling a lot of sympathetic energy in my nervous system right now, and I can feel embarrassment about what I just said to you, right? So my favorite on-ramping for some of these things is I realize that. This is a tool that I give a lot of clients. If you can just say, I realize that I'm triggered, I realize that I'm activated, I realize that this is happening, right? If you can just start there, you don't even have to have a complete picture of what's going on for you. But if you
Mhm.
can communicate to the other person that you're feeling something, right? And able to name that in real time, it just humanizes the experience in a way that's really important.
Mm.
You know what
I
I
like
can,
that one.
what I'll add is, so we already said the inner critic transforms into an inner coach.
Yeah.
The escapers transform into inner nurturers. So the escapers are turning away from our shame and from our pain or from our own feelings. And so the correction or transformation there is now we have parts that actually will turn towards ourselves when it's
Mm.
hard, when it doesn't feel good inside. And the key thing, though, is that shame doesn't transform necessarily into a new part. It's about making this distinction between what's my actual raw experience and then what's the story that I'm overlaying. It's a shame story that I'm putting on my experience or that has been put on my experience my whole life.
Yeah.
And when we can tease that, so just that right there, what's my raw experience versus the story I'm telling about what's happening or telling about myself or telling about the world. And then building that capacity to hold our own experience. So in my case, it's not that I never feel shame anymore, but when I do, I don't go into these inner critic and escape cycles that take me down into a spiral that's like I can be down for a while. Right? Now it's like, okay, this feels like crap, right? But there's good reason why it doesn't feel good, and I can hold myself in the part of me that's feeling the shame,
Mm.
and then it doesn't last as long. To be frank, yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about when you talk about real raw experience, another way to say that is just the vulnerability of the lived experience in real time. And what I see a lot of people having trouble accessing in the moment is the feelings, right, that are generated, the hard emotions that come up, and then the needs that are connected to those, right? And it's often the shame stories about what those feelings mean or what they mean about you or what your needs are, right? I shouldn't have that need. I shouldn't need your reassurance. I shouldn't need to feel special, right? A lot of these needs that are really important, especially in the sort of non-monogamous world, like there's certain needs that are fundamental to be able to do non-monogamy well. And if you've got these stories that to even have that need is a problem,
Yeah.
right, we're screwed. So we're really wanting to allow people to have access to, right, the things that as human beings we really need to be okay, to feel safe and connected in real time. And it's often these shame stories that make the access to those things impossible.
Mm. The stories we tell ourselves and the trouble, the deep trouble that they get us in. So I hear that the book is out imminently. This episode is being timed well. So what day does the book come out?
On Halloween.
Oh, I love
Oh,
that.
yes.
You know,
Oh,
isn't
yay.
that great?
That's
That's great.
fantastic. Okay. So everybody's going to want to run to the link that we'll have in the notes to grab yourself a copy. I'm curious to, like, as you're seeing this work, could we just does this work? Does it have is there an end goal? Is there something, or is this something that we ask people to take on as a tool? Like when you say transformation, we touched on this at the beginning. Should people think of this book as something to come back to over and over again and work through? Or are you hoping that they'll like take the moves in and then just be able to carry it? Are you yourselves just finding that now once you've got like the moves down, you can just kind of rinse and repeat? Or is it a process that you have to work through like start to finish?
Yeah, I think it depends on where people are in their personal journey,
Mm,
and so I think it can be, for some, it can be sort of a primer, for others, it can be sort of a reference. For us, what we're recognizing is this is a starting point, right? And so we're wanting people to have access to this so that they, again, have normalized, internalized, integrated, right, these structures, these concepts. So we're wanting people to have this relationship to their own experience, their own consciousness, and then take that as a starting point into, right, relational work at whatever level that feels relevant to them. But really, it starts with us. So much of relational work is really about coming back to ourselves.
yeah.
So we're wanting this as a starting point, kind of offering as such, imagining that we're going to be scaffolding, the work that follows in terms of, okay, how do we continue to apply this? How do we
Yeah.
build off of this in larger context?
Beautiful.
But for us, this is really like we want people to have the, like, this is what we're seeing. Like every client that we see that it's stuck somewhere in their personal growth journey, this is relevant to some degree. And so we're wanting everyone to kind of like, let's sort of bolster the general relational consciousness of our society, of our culture in general. Like let's create this access point, normalize this more, and this is sort of
Okay.
a small step in that intention.
Okay. That's actually exactly what I was hoping. Jessica, would you say, because I use polysecure as my grounding to attachment theory. I say like, hey, like this, you don't have to be non-monogamous. It's a
Right.
good baseline.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
it sounds like this would sit alongside that. It's not something that you memorize, but it is like a baseline text we'd want to put into our relationship work.
Right. It's not something you memorize, but it's a process that you internalize, and
Yeah.
then you will feel and be different. So,
Mm,
my theory is that until we address our inner shame triangle, we're living in our survival strategies and we're not actually living authentically. And
mm,
so, part of what this does is it gets us to not just be in survival trauma strategies
yeah.
and reenacting that, but to live authentically and have more of this self leadership. And so it doesn't mean hardship in life doesn't happen anymore. Of course it does. But now instead of getting stuck in a shame triangle dynamic, we have an inner love triangle resource. So when life is hard, I turn inward and there's actually resources. How incredible is that?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. And
Building
so
resilience and
it's
tolerance of when
exactly
things don't go well.
right. They're
That's
not right. People die, or I make mistakes, or I feel like, I should have done that differently, of course. But I could have a way of being in a growth experience with it instead of a fixed shame based experience with it.
Yeah.
I think
That,
the other thing too is people might go through the book several times for different kinds of shame triangles they have. Like we've been talking about,
yeah.
sexual shame, which might be very different than gender shame and gender expectations or things around money. So we can have different triangles that we want to go through this with.
Brilliant. I want to highlight this because I've stood on a quite a soapbox talking about, like, remember, attachment strategies are mutable,
Yeah,
and I
right.
get really worked up over that. And so now I'm seeing the direct connection between, like, okay, learn about your attachment style, learn about those patterns, and this could be one piece. Using the shame triangle is one of the ways that we actively do that attachment wound work. Because if we're talking about getting out of survival strategies, I mean, what is an attachment style more than a survival strategy?
Yeah, and I would say that our parents and caregivers' lack of being able to even know about and work on their shame triangle is what created our attachment style.
Right, right. So talk about doing roots up work, like
Yeah.
really getting
Yeah.
down. This is radical work because we're really at the root of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm really excited.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I, the audience will be able to find everything in the show notes, but tell them where to find the two of you and your work.
Yeah, you can find me at restorativerelationship.com. That's my website. So that's the easiest place to get to me.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at jessicafern.com.
You
So
guys, you make it so
Make it
easy.
so easy.
made
Yeah.
it pretty easy. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so yep, go grab your copy of Transforming the Shame Triangle. Jessica, David, thank you so much for joining us. This was a total pleasure, as it always is, to talk with you. I'm really excited to release this to the audience. I'm glad they don't have to wait too much longer because everybody deserves to have a copy of this on their shelf.
Thanks so
Thank you
much for
so
having
much.
Thank
us.
you
Yeah, it's
too.
great to see you both again.
This is great.
Yeah.
We talk to you all the time. It is absolutely imperative to me that we get to hear from you as well.
Yes, please.
So we'd love to invite you to join us. Join Ken and I. We're holding monthly Ask Me Anythings. You can show up, bring your questions from podcast episodes, from your relationships, bring questions about non-monogamy, about individuation, about relationship skills. We would love to share space with you. We're hosting these AMAs free of charge for our podcast listeners. You are the Playing with Fire community, and it matters a ton to us that we connect with you directly. So
Oh,
go,
I would so love to hear your questions, and it'd be so awesome.
yeah. Go to joliehamilton.com/AMA and you'll find a way to sign up real quick and get an invitation to join us in a small group where we're going to get together and talk about all things non-monogamy, individuation, and relationships.